Hello, everyone. We know that everyone is worried about the upcoming interview, and we want to help you succeed in passing the US Citizenship test. This process can be stressful, but with the right preparation, you can walk into the interview with confidence. One important part of the interview involves the officer asking the applicant to explain vocabulary definitions. Many applicants have failed the interview because they couldn't explain key vocabulary, which can be a crucial part of demonstrating your understanding of English. In this video, we provide 90 keyword definitions from the 37 yes-no questions that are commonly asked during the US Citizenship Interview. We understand that memorization can be challenging, so we've simplified the definitions into short, easy-to-remember explanations. Everyone, no matter their learning style, can memorize the vocabulary very quickly. Let's get started and help yourself improve your chances of passing the interview. How would you define the oath of allegiance? How would you define the oath of allegiance? A promise to be loyal to the United States. A promise to be loyal to the United States. Can you define genocide? Can you define genocide? To kill a whole race. To kill a whole race. Can you explain what claim means? Can you explain what claim means? To say something is true. To say something is true. Do you understand what O means? Do you understand what O means? To have a debt. To have a debt. Do you know what work of national importance is? Do you know what work of national importance is? Tasks that are important to a nation. Tasks that are important to a nation. Do you know what overdue is? Do you know what overdue is? Past a deadline. Past a deadline. How would you explain what probation is? How would you explain what probation is? You report to an officer regularly instead of jail time. You report to an officer regularly instead of jail time. How would you explain what a military unit is? How would you explain what a military unit is? A group works for government. A group works for government. Can you explain what fraudulent is? Can you explain what fraudulent is? To claim something that is not true. To claim something that is not true. How would you explain what smuggle means? How would you explain what smuggle means? To take things to a country illegally. To take things to a country illegally. What does register mean? What does register mean? To sign up. To sign up. What does produce mean? What does produce mean? To make something. To make something. Do you know what a hereditary title is? Do you know what a hereditary title is? A royal title like prince or princess. A royal title like prince or princess. What does overthrow mean? What does overthrow mean? To remove a government from power. To remove a government from power. How would you explain what the Communist Party is? How would you explain what the Communist Party is? Like China, North Korea. Like China, North Korea. What is the definition of claim to be a US citizen? What is the definition of claim to be a US citizen? To state you are a US citizen. To state you are a US citizen. Can you explain what a prison camp means? Can you explain what a prison camp means? A place to keep enemy soldiers. A place to keep enemy soldiers. Can you define a vigilante unit? Can you define a vigilante unit? A group that acts like the police but are not the police. A group that acts like the police but are not the police. How would you explain what a weapon is? How would you explain what a weapon is? Like a knife or gun. Like a knife or gun. What does it mean to owe taxes? What does it mean to owe taxes? To owe the government money. To owe the government money. What is the definition of civilian? What is the definition of civilian? A person who is not in the military. A person who is not in the military. How would you explain what incite is? How would you explain what incite is? To encourage. To encourage. Can you define prison? Can you define prison? A place where prisoners are kept. A place where prisoners are kept. How do you understand what crime means? How do you understand what crime means? An action that breaks the law. An action that breaks the law. How would you explain what vote is? How would you explain what vote is? To elect new leaders. To elect new leaders. Do you understand what weapons training means? Do you understand what weapons training means? To learn how to use a gun. To learn how to use a gun. What does a paramilitary unit mean? What does a paramilitary unit mean? Like a military group, but is not official. Like a military group, but is not official. What does recruit mean? What does recruit mean? To ask. To ask. Can you define manufacture? Can you define manufacture? To make something. To make something. Can you explain what a totalitarian party means? Can you explain what a totalitarian party means? Government controls everything and people have no power. Government controls everything and people have no power. Can you explain what procure means? Can you explain what procure means? To find someone for sex. To find someone for sex. Can you define a non-resident alien? Can you define a non-resident alien? A person who has not passed the green card test. A person who has not passed the green card test. Do you understand what conscript means? Do you understand what conscript means? To require someone to join the army. To require someone to join the army. Do you understand what gamble means? Do you understand what gamble means? To play a game for money. To play a game for money. What is the definition of paying alimony? What is the definition of paying alimony? To pay money to an ex-spouse after a divorce. To pay money to an ex-spouse after a divorce. Can you define what it means to lie? Can you define what it means to lie? To say something that is not true. To say something that is not true. Can you define hijack? Can you define hijack? To stop and steal a moving airplane. To stop and steal a moving airplane. Do you know what confined means? Do you know what confined means? To be kept in a place. To be kept in a place. Can you define order of nobility? Can you define order of nobility? Like king or queen. Like king or queen. Do you understand what non-combatant services are? Do you understand what non-combatant services are? Services that do not involve combat. Services that do not involve combat. What does assassination mean? What does assassination mean? An action of killing someone. An action of killing someone. Can you define a guerrilla group? Can you define a guerrilla group? A group that uses weapons to attack the government. A group that uses weapons to attack the government. How would you explain what a self-defense unit is? How would you explain what a self-defense unit is? A group that protects a place. A group that protects a place. What is the definition of arrested? What is the definition of arrested? Handcuffed by the police. Handcuffed by the police. What does selective service mean? What does selective service mean? Services in armed forces under law. Services in armed forces under law. What is the definition of rescission? What is the definition of rescission? To take back a decision. To take back a decision. What does the form of government of the United States mean? What does the form of government of the United States mean? Republic. Republic. Can you explain what national origin means? Can you explain what national origin means? Where a person is from. Where a person is from. Do you know what illegal drugs or narcotics are? Do you know what illegal drugs or narcotics are? Like heroin or cocaine. Like heroin or cocaine. What does drafted mean? What does drafted mean? Being selected as a soldier. Being selected as a soldier. Can you define a detention facility? Can you define a detention facility? A place where people are forced to stay. A place where people are forced to stay. How would you define civilian direction? How would you define civilian direction? A direction from a person who is not in the military. A direction from a person who is not in the military. What is the definition of military-type training? What is the definition of military-type training? Learning to fight in combat. Learning to fight in combat. What does commit a crime mean? What does commit a crime mean? To do something that breaks the law. To do something that breaks the law. Do you understand what a suspended sentence means? Do you understand what a suspended sentence means? Delaying of a sentence. Delaying of a sentence. Do you know what dispense is? Do you know what dispense is? To supply something. To supply something. What is the definition of public benefit? What is the definition of public benefit? Welfare, like food stamps. Welfare, like food stamps. What is the definition of deport? What is the definition of deport? To force a person to leave the country. To force a person to leave the country. What are the U.S. Armed Forces? What are the U.S. Armed Forces? U.S. Military, Navy, Air Force. U.S. Military, Navy, Air Force. Do you know what sabotage is? Do you know what sabotage is? To destroy something. To destroy something. Do you understand what drug paraphernalia is? Do you understand what drug paraphernalia is? Equipment to make illegal drugs. Equipment to make illegal drugs. Do you know what admission into the United States is? Do you know what admission into the United States is? The right to enter the United States. The right to enter the United States. Do you understand what kidnap means? Do you understand what kidnap means? To take someone away illegally. To take someone away illegally. Do you understand what detained means? Do you understand what detained means? Held in custody by police. Held in custody by police. What does threaten mean? What does threaten mean? To warn to hurt someone. To warn to hurt someone. What does it mean to be cited? What does it mean to be cited? Given a ticket by police. Given a ticket by police. Can you explain what prostitute means? Can you explain what prostitute means? Someone who has sex for money. Someone who has sex for money. Do you know what misrepresentation is? Do you know what misrepresentation is? To lie or give wrong information. To lie or give wrong information. Do you know what advocate is? Do you know what advocate is? To support. To support. Can you define immigration benefit? Can you define immigration benefit? Things like a visa, green card, or citizenship. Things like a visa, green card, or citizenship. Can you explain what paramilitary training means? Can you explain what paramilitary training means? Learning to fight in combat. Learning to fight in combat. How would you explain what hostilities are? How would you explain what hostilities are? Fighting in a war. Fighting in a war. Do you understand what torture means? Do you understand what torture means? To hurt someone physically. To hurt someone physically. What is the definition of a police unit? What is the definition of a police unit? A group protects community. A group protects community. What does distribute mean? What does distribute mean? To supply something. To supply something. How would you explain what a rebel group is? How would you explain what a rebel group is? A group that fights a government. A group that fights a government. Do you know what jail is? Do you know what jail is? A place where prisoners are kept. A place where prisoners are kept. What does a labor camp mean? What does a labor camp mean? A place to force people to work. A place to force people to work. Can you define enlist? Can you define enlist? To sign up in the armed forces. To sign up in the armed forces. What is the definition of misleading? What is the definition of misleading? Giving the wrong idea. Giving the wrong idea. What does parole mean? What does parole mean? The early release of a prisoner. The early release of a prisoner. How would you explain what an offense is? How would you explain what an offense is? A minor crime. A minor crime. Do you know what charged is? Do you know what charged is? Police tell you that you did something illegal. Police tell you that you did something illegal. How would you explain what cultivate means? How would you explain what cultivate means? To grow plants. To grow plants. How would you define controlled substances? How would you define controlled substances? You can buy it with a prescription, but with restrictions. You can buy it with a prescription, but with restrictions. Do you understand what dependent means? Do you understand what dependent means? Someone who relies on another person. Someone who relies on another person. Do you understand what false means? Do you understand what false means? Not true. Not true. What are deportation proceedings? What are deportation proceedings? Process of removing a person. Process of removing a person. Can you explain what it means to avoid being drafted? Can you explain what it means to avoid being drafted? To prevent being selected as a soldier. To prevent being selected as a soldier. What is the Constitution? What is the Constitution? It is the supreme law of the land. It is the supreme law of the land. Can you explain what it means to bear arms? Can you explain what it means to bear arms? To own or use a gun. To own or use a gun.